This is awful discouraging. You know, we do our very best to grow a good crop to feed the world, and then we can't hardly give it away.
Fields across America are turning quiet, not because they've been harvested, but because the crops are dying on the stalk.
Imagine acres of American farmland, quiet and still, not because the harvest is complete, but because the crops are dying where they stand. In September 2025 alone, over 400 million pounds of food were left to rot. Corn drying up in Iowa, soybeans yellowing in Illinois, and tomatoes collapsing under the California sun. So why is U.S.-grown food going to waste when demand should exist? And why are farmers forced to watch their crops die in the field while imports keep flowing in and grocery prices stay high? Let me paint you a picture. Imagine driving through the heart of Iowa or Illinois this fall. The cornfields stretch endlessly under the big blue sky, the soybean rows lined up like green and gold stripes. But instead of the usual hum of combines and trucks, there's silence. Not silence because the harvest is done, but silence because much of what was grown is simply left to rot. This isn't a scene from a drought or a bad season. The crops were healthy, planted and nurtured to feed the world. But now they're being abandoned because the demand that should have been there just isn't.
The numbers don't scream, they whisper. Just 3 million metric tons of soybeans sold for export as of late September. On paper, it looks like a delay. In practice, it's a signal. A crop that once moved billions.
One of the biggest shocks this year is with soybeans. For decades, Chinese buyers have been a reliable lifeline for U.S. soybean farmers. They bought huge volumes year after year, and American growers built entire operations around that demand. But in 2025, China has yet to make any purchases for the new marketing year. That export drop doesn't just sting, it devastates a crop that many farmers planned their budgets, loans, and planting schedules around. Suddenly, the soybeans that were supposed to sail across the Pacific aren't moving, leaving farmers staring at bins full of beans and no buyers knocking on the door. It's a financial and psychological blow all at once. Corn, which many consider the backbone of American agriculture, is facing its own crisis. Across Nebraska, Iowa, and parts of Illinois, fields show stress and disease. Rust, tar spot, and underdeveloped cobs are cropping up, and some of it is tied to cost pressures. Fungicide prices have doubled over the past 2 years, diesel is hovering near $6 a gallon, and some farmers have had to scale back applications or skip parts of their spraying schedules. The result is a harvest coming in far below what was expected in certain regions. That shortfall isn't just numbers on a screen, it affects loan repayments, feed costs, and whether machinery gets paid off this year. Some corn is being stored on farms or in grain elevators, but that's a risky bet. Moisture, mold, and time can ruin what's left, and in some cases, entire fields are being abandoned or cut for silage because the math simply doesn't add up anymore. The financial pain isn't limited to corn and soybeans. Even when harvests are strong, commodity prices are deeply depressed. Some projections suggest farmers could lose as much as $160 per acre on corn because the cost to grow it exceeds what they can sell it. 4. High input costs, from fuel to fertilizer, seed, and equipment, are squeezing margins so tight that many farmers feel trapped between producing food and losing money while doing it. On top of that, tariffs aren't helping. They've disrupted export markets while also driving up the cost of imported equipment and parts that farmers need to operate efficiently. The system that once felt reliable now seems fragile, and the stress shows. This uncertainty is changing how farmers make decisions. Many are reducing soybean acreage, cutting back by millions of acres this season, and planting more corn instead. Corn is seen as somewhat safer because it's less dependent on Chinese exports, even though it comes with its own set of risks. The crop rotation that farmers have relied on for decades is being rewritten in real time based on which crops are more likely to bring a paycheck rather than a loss.
Were to be found. Instead, silence. Entire acres heavy with ripe fruit, and no one bothering to harvest. Not because they're late, but because there's no reason to pick anymore. Tomatoes were once a point of pride,
Then there are the perishable crops, the ones that can't wait for a buyer or a better market. Tomatoes, for example, are incredibly vulnerable. Once they hit their peak color, the clock starts ticking. Pick too early and they aren't fully developed. Pick too late and they rot in the field. Delays in contracts or transportation, or simply not having enough hands to pick, have led to massive losses across California's Central Valley. Grapes are facing a similar fate. Orders are shrinking from wineries and juice processors alike, leaving vineyards with fruit that either rots on the vine or ferments in the sun. Even strawberries, arguably the softest of all crops, are going unpicked. Labor shortages, picking challenges, and reduced operational capacity mean that ripe berries are left to waste, despite their value. Leafy greens, which thrive on razor-thin timelines, are not immune either. Lettuce, spinach, and other salad greens can wilt and go bad in hours if the harvest window is missed. Freight delays, higher transportation costs, or simply not having enough crews to pick can result in total loss for entire fields. And then there are almonds, a long-term, high-investment crop. California almond growers have been watching global demand weaken, with buyers in India and Europe turning to cheaper alternatives. Some are letting trees go unwatered or pulling out entire sections because continuing to grow them simply doesn't make financial sense. These are crops that take years to mature, and when margins collapse, the consequences aren't just immediate, they ripple into future seasons.
And every morning, American farmers wake up facing one terrifying question. Am I planting a harvest or planting my own bankruptcy? What was once the pride of America, its mighty, tireless agriculture.
What's staggering about all of this is the paradox it presents. On one hand, grocery stores remain stocked. Shipments still arrive from overseas, and prices continue to climb in some categories. But behind the scenes, American fields are falling silent. Farmers are walking away from their crops, and supply chains are quietly breaking down. When corn, soybeans, and perishable crops like tomatoes, grapes, and strawberries are left in the field, the impact stretches far beyond the farm. Local economies feel it, from equipment suppliers to fuel vendors, from pickers to processing plants. The losses are not always visible to the average consumer, but they are real, measurable, and mounting. And it's not just the crops that are suffering. Farmers themselves are facing intense stress. Planting and nurturing a crop, hoping for a reliable market, only to watch it go unsold or abandoned, is emotionally exhausting. Years of experience, investment, and trust in the system feel undermined. Decisions that once felt straightforward, how much to plant, what crop to rely on, are now fraught with uncertainty. Many farmers are rethinking not only what they plant, but whether it's sustainable to keep doing this at all. Smaller farmers and those with tighter margins are particularly at risk, as they often lack the financial cushion to ride out a season where demand collapses. The situation in U.S. agriculture today serves as a warning. Dependence on single markets, whether it's China for soybeans or specific buyers for perishable crops, has exposed vulnerabilities. Oversupply, combined with weak demand and rising production costs, has created a perfect storm. Farmers are caught in a cycle where producing food can sometimes cost more than letting it go to waste. Storage limitations, logistical challenges, and global competition only deepen the problem. Yet, despite the crisis, there are paths forward. Trade diversification, better domestic processing infrastructure, improved risk management, and strategic policy support could help stabilize the industry. Farmers need reliable markets, timely payments, and support for storage and transportation costs. But even with these interventions, the current situation highlights a systemic fragility that has quietly been building over the years. If this continues, we could see long-term changes in what is grown, who grows it, and how food moves from American fields to the rest of the world. Driving through those quiet fields, you can almost hear the weight of this reality. Rows of corn and soybeans stand half-harvested, tomatoes split in the sun, strawberries left to rot, almond trees turning brown. The visible products on grocery shelves are only a fraction of what was grown, and what isn't making it there is a stark reminder of the fragility of the system. Farmers are doing everything they can, but the system around them is failing to support them. It's a quiet collapse, one that doesn't make headlines but has consequences for everyone who depends on food. Farmers, workers, local communities, and consumers alike. And as these fields grow silent, it's worth asking, what happens if this pattern continues? How many more crops will be left behind? And how much more of the backbone of American agriculture will quietly disappear before we notice? In short, U.S. farmers are stuck in a bind. They're producing food for a hungry world, but the world isn't buying, at least not in the ways it used to. Corn, soybeans, tomatoes, grapes, strawberries, leafy greens, almonds. Each crop tells a story of labor, investment, and lost opportunity.
They're definitely making the news recently because the tariffs that Trump is putting on China have resulted in retaliatory moves.
Let's take a step back and talk about what's really happening to U.S. farmers right now. It's one thing to hear that fields of corn or soybeans are being left to rot, but it's another to understand the human and economic strain behind it. Many farmers are under enormous stress, both mentally and financially. Imagine pouring months of labor, money, and hope into a crop only to find that there is no market for it. That's the reality this year. Record harvests are sitting in bins or decaying in fields. And for some farmers, that means their entire livelihood feels threatened. When you've built your business around predictable export markets, China for example, and suddenly those buyers aren't there, it shakes the very foundation of the model. Trust that once felt solid is now eroding, leaving farmers questioning whether the system they've relied on for decades can still support them. This stress doesn't stay on the farm. It ripples outward through the local economies. Equipment sellers see fewer orders, seed and fertilizer providers notice a drop in demand, and transport companies face gaps in their scheduling and income. When farmers struggle to sell, the businesses that support them often struggle too. In some regions, that means fewer hiring opportunities for seasonal pickers, slower investments in local infrastructure, and even reduced activity in towns that have historically depended on agriculture as the backbone of the economy. It's a quiet but very real chain reaction. Farmers themselves have been calling for more support, whether through loans, subsidies, or policy reforms, but many view temporary aid as a band-aid that doesn't address the underlying problems. The crisis is raising bigger systemic questions about supply chain resilience, trade diversification, and the need for meaningful reform in U.S. farm policy. The dependency on China has been a critical factor in this mess. For years, Chinese buyers were a reliable outlet for soybeans, and farmers tailored their planting, budgeting, and long-term planning around that demand. But with China dramatically reducing purchases or holding off entirely, the fragility of that dependence has been exposed. Suddenly, overproduction meets insufficient demand, creating what economists call systemic inefficiency. We are literally growing more than we can use or sell at profitable prices. And because the global supply chain is complex, this isn't just a matter of local crop loss, it's a national issue affecting trade balances, domestic processing, and the broader economy. Risk management has also proven challenging. Not all farmers hedge their crops or use forward contracts effectively. Some assumed the historical pattern of demand would continue, and now they're paying the price. Historic low margins and soaring input costs, from fuel to fertilizer to equipment, have left many farmers exposed. They face a stark choice: harvest and store the crop at their own risk, sell at a loss, or simply walk away. And when the latter happens, it feels like the system is failing them rather than the other way around. The mental strain is just as significant as the financial one. Farming has always been high risk, but the stakes feel different when the system itself appears to be shifting beneath your feet. Farmers are seeing crops that could feed millions sit unsold while imports continue to arrive on U.S. soil. That disconnect isn't just frustrating, it's deeply demoralizing. For those who've spent generations tending the land, the thought that future planting decisions might be dictated more by market uncertainty than by tradition or science is a heavy burden. The situation also makes you think about the long-term viability of American agriculture. If demand continues to falter and input costs remain high, we could see permanent shrinkage in certain crops or even entire regions. Smaller farmers in particular are at risk of being forced out, unable to survive multiple seasons of low prices and low demand. Even younger farmers who might have entered the field with optimism and new ideas could be discouraged if they see the economic realities as unsustainable. This isn't just about one bad season. It could reshape what crops are grown, where they're grown, and who is able to grow them at all. Perishable crops are perhaps the most telling example of this fragility. Tomatoes, for instance, are incredibly time-sensitive. Once they reach their peak color, they must be harvested quickly. Any delay in contracts, labor, or transport leads to rapid spoilage. Grapes are facing similar pressure, with reduced orders from wineries and processors leaving fruit to rot on the vine. Strawberries, labor-intensive and delicate, are being left unharvested because picking and transport costs outweigh potential profit. Leafy greens, which wilt within hours if not handled properly, are also suffering. Even almonds, a long-term crop that takes years to mature, are being left to dry out or abandoned because global demand is soft and margins are no longer sustainable. What all of this illustrates is that the current crisis is more than a simple mismatch of supply and demand. It's a structural challenge. The U.S. agricultural system has been built around certain assumptions: reliable exports, predictable domestic demand, manageable input costs, and those assumptions are being tested like never before. Farmers are learning that producing food is only part of the equation. They also need access to dependable markets, stable pricing, and a system that allows them to transfer risk effectively. When those elements are missing, even the most diligent, hard-working farmer can find themselves losing, despite producing a bumper crop. As difficult as this is, it also opens a conversation about reform and adaptation, trade diversification, better domestic processing and storage infrastructure, and risk management. Strategies could help prevent such crises in the future. Policy support needs to move beyond temporary relief and tackle the long-term vulnerabilities in the system. If successful, these changes could help restore some of the confidence that has been lost among U.S. farmers, encouraging investment in crops and infrastructure that were previously seen as too risky. Driving through American fields today, the story is visible but subtle. Rows of corn and soybeans stand half-harvested, tomatoes split in the sun, grapes fermenting where they were meant to be harvested, strawberries rotting because no one is available to pick them, and almond trees drying out in long abandoned orchards. On grocery shelves, things may still appear normal, but that's only because imports and logistics temporarily fill the gaps. What's missing is the resilience of the domestic system and the confidence of the people who grow our food. Ultimately, U.S. farmers are facing a test of survival and adaptation. They are producing vast quantities of food, but the demand they depend on is no longer guaranteed. Corn, soybeans, tomatoes, grapes, strawberries, leafy greens, almonds, each crop tells a story of human effort, investment, and lost opportunity. The decisions farmers make today, whether to reduce acreage, shift crops, or leave fields unharvested, will shape the future of American agriculture for years to come.
The high tariffs on fertilizers and equipment are driving up their input costs, and Brazil and Russia, most notably, have dramatically increased their crop exports to China.
Let's dive into what's really happening with U.S. farmers and why so much of the harvest is going to waste, even as demand seems to be collapsing. This isn't just a story about crops or prices. It's about a system under strain and the human lives tied to it. Imagine spending months, sometimes years, preparing your land, planting, tending, and finally harvesting a crop, only to find that there's no market waiting for it. That's the reality in 2025 for many farmers. Fields of corn, soybeans, tomatoes, grapes, strawberries, leafy greens, and even almonds are being left to rot, not because of drought, pests, or weather, but because demand has slowed, export markets have faltered, and costs have become impossible to cover. It's a strange paradox. America has plenty of food being grown, yet so much of it never makes it from the farm to the table. A huge part of the problem lies in export dependency. For years, U.S. soybean farmers, in particular, relied heavily on Chinese buyers, who traditionally purchased massive volumes each season. In 2025, however, China has yet to make any purchases for the new marketing year. That sudden drop devastates a crop many farmers built their business models around. When export demand disappears or slows dramatically, farmers are left holding unsold inventory. Around half of the 2024 corn and soybean crops, according to Farm Progress, are still unsold, with storage facilities like grain elevators reaching capacity. Farmers now have to store more on-farm, which carries its own risks. Moisture, mold, and deterioration can quickly destroy quality and value. Meanwhile, costs remain high. Fuel, fertilizer, seeds, and equipment are all expensive, squeezing margins tighter than ever. Tariffs have added to the problem, not only by disrupting traditional export markets, but also by increasing the cost of imported machinery, equipment parts, and inputs. So even with a record or high harvest, commodity prices are deeply depressed. In some projections, U.S. farmers may face per-acre losses as high as $160 for corn, where costs far exceed what they can get from the market. It's a harsh reality, and for many, it's a scenario they didn't see coming, despite years of careful planning. Corn provides a good snapshot of this crisis. Fields in Iowa and Nebraska have shown unusual stress, with widespread rust, tar spot, and underdeveloped cobs due to delayed or reduced fungicide application. Yield reports in some areas have come in far below expectations, affecting loan repayments and profitability. Some of this corn is being stored, but long-term storage carries risks that can turn a high-yield season into financial disaster. In other cases, farmers have simply abandoned fields or cut the crop for silage because continuing the harvest isn't financially viable. Soybeans face a similar struggle, with very little export demand leaving bins uncontracted and unclaimed. The risks of storage degradation are real, and the uncertainty about future demand has even pushed some farmers to rethink whether to plant soybeans at all in the coming season. Perishable crops highlight the fragility of the system even more. Tomatoes, for instance, must be picked quickly once they reach full color, or they rot. Delays in contracts, transportation, or labor have meant huge losses in California's Central Valley this year. Grapes are facing similar issues. Orders from wineries and processors have shrunk, leaving fruit unharvested or spoiling on the vine. Strawberries, which require labor-intensive picking, are being left in fields due to shortages of workers or cost constraints. Leafy greens are extremely sensitive. Missed shipping windows can mean total loss within hours. Even almonds, a long-term investment crop, are being abandoned because margins can no longer justify continued care, with some growers even pulling trees or turning off irrigation. Across the board, these examples show that the crisis is not about one crop or region, it's a systemic problem touching every level of American agriculture. This situation has enormous human consequences. Farmers are under extreme mental and financial stress. Producing a record harvest without buyers can be demoralizing, especially when export dependencies crumble. Rural communities feel the ripple effects. Equipment sellers, fertilizer and seed providers, and transporters all face reduced business. Seasonal hiring for pickers is down, and investments in local infrastructure slow. These challenges affect families and the broader community, showing that farm crises aren't isolated. They ripple out and impact entire regions. Mental health support in rural areas is already limited, and the current situation has intensified the need for community networks and accessible services to help farm families cope with the pressure.
What we're needing help is some sort of federal assistance. We started out in 23 and 24 have been off years. Some farmers had to refinance in 25 of this year to be able to stay in business, to help right the ship.
Addressing this crisis requires thinking beyond temporary fixes. Trade diversification is crucial. Relying on a single country or market is a high-stakes gamble, and developing new export markets could reduce vulnerability. Expanding U.S. processing capacity, like soy crushing facilities or tomato canning operations, would allow more of the domestic crop to be used locally instead of going to waste. Revising farm support and subsidy programs to better account for storage costs, input risk, and market volatility could give farmers the safety net they need to make smarter planting and harvesting decisions. Encouraging forward contracting, hedging, and crop insurance, and improving the use of futures markets could help protect farmers from price swings and unexpected drops in demand. Storage and logistics are another critical area. Building modern storage facilities and improving transportation networks would reduce spoilage and help farmers move their crops more efficiently. Perishable crops especially need faster, more reliable systems to prevent losses. Meanwhile, mental health and community support must be strengthened to help farmers manage stress and build resilience in the face of financial uncertainty. Supporting farm families isn't just a feel-good measure, it's essential for maintaining a functioning agricultural system. The question remains, are we growing more food than we can sell? Overproduction combined with declining demand has exposed inefficiencies in the system. Risk management failures, including insufficient hedging or forward contracting, have left some farmers exposed to historically low margins. If these conditions persist, we may see permanent shrinkage in certain crops or regions, pushing smaller or younger farmers out of the business altogether. The next decade could look very different from the one that built the current U.S. agricultural landscape, with long-term implications for domestic food security, rural economies, and global trade patterns. Driving through fields today, the story is visible but quiet. Half-harvested corn swaying in the wind, soybeans sitting in bins with no buyers, tomatoes split under the sun, grapes left to ferment on the vine, strawberries rotting in fields, leafy greens wilting without transport, and almond orchards drying out. These images tell a story of effort lost, opportunity squandered, and a system in urgent need of reform. Supermarket shelves might not reveal the crisis, thanks to imports and logistics temporarily filling the gaps, but the underlying strain is profound. Farmers are making hard decisions daily, balancing cost, labor, and risk, while the clock ticks on crops that can't wait. Ultimately, the challenge for U.S. agriculture is twofold: surviving the current crisis while building a more resilient system for the future. Farmers need markets they can trust, better tools to manage risk, and support structures that account for the realities of modern agriculture. Trade diversification, processing capacity expansion, improved logistics, and enhanced mental health and community services are not optional. They are essential. The choices farmers make today will shape the future of U.S. agriculture, determining what crops are viable, which communities thrive, and how resilient the system will be when the next disruption comes. If we want to see fields full of food rather than lost opportunities, it's time to pay attention, adapt, and invest in a system that supports both farmers and the food supply. The harvest doesn't wait, and neither should we.